Tarzan of the Apes is a book about a wild jungle man written by Edgar Rice Burroughs in 1912. It's the first in a series of books about the titular character, and it also happens to be one of my favorite books, and in my opinion, probably the least well-adapted book to film I've ever seen. Anyway, you'd probably expect me to review one of those poor film adaptations, but there are so many out there, I didn't know where to start. And how could I start without having the book to compare it to? So instead, I decided to give you a short synopsis series about the first book and do an analysis at the end. That way, we can properly review what went wrong in some of those funky films out there. But be prepared, the book also happens to be pretty controversial, which was kind of what made me want to check out what all the fuss was about in the first place. Let's just say the book is certainly a product of its times. Ooh, but that's enough of a preface. Let's grab a vine and swing into the story. Our story opens with a narrator who tells us that they heard this story from someone else who was under the influence of some spirits, and not the spooky kind. So we know it's gotta be coming from a reliable source. But the narrator is sure enough that the story may be true after super sleuthing and finding some clues. So, he changed the names of some of the people to protect their identities. But that's not going to change anything for us, so let's keep going. They start off telling us about the noble John Clayton, Lord Greystoke, who was chosen to head to the African colonies. There are reports that the natives, often simply referred to in the book as the blacks, are living under poor conditions and are being exploited by the soldiers there. Okay, let's pause for a second. I mentioned before that this book is a product of its times. Just there, that terminology, that's an example of what I was talking about. Back to the story. John, sometimes referred to in the book as Clayton or Lord Greystoke, is described as a super radical dude, strong and brave, sound of mind, body, and morals. He has great posture and gray eyes. He's been married to a young woman named Alice Rutherford for only 3 months, and the author doesn't bother going into as much detail describing her. That's something else the author tends to do, but we'll get into that at the end of the series. John is reluctant to take her on his quest, but it's apparently an 8-year commitment, so they decide that they'll go together. They hitch a ride on a small ship called the Fuwalda, and the look of the crew doesn't inspire confidence. The men look super shady, and some are obviously brigands and bad guys, but that doesn't deter our noble soldier, and they board the ship. It isn't super well explained why he took this barge of brigands instead of a colonial vessel full of friendlies, other than the one sentence explaining that they chartered it. I guess we'll just have to assume that they only had so much to spend on the voyage and learn the valuable lesson that buying cheap can be expensive down the line. But I imagine if he'd had the option to get on a friendly frigate, he probably would have. Once on the ship, they're appalled by the captain's nasty treatment of his crew. He's super mean and abusive, but they still have lunch in his cabin on the count of it being the right and proper thing to do. On the second day, after a chat with him, he bumps into an old frail member of the crew and beats him down. And if you're thinking he should get a taste of his own medicine, you're in luck, because he gets it as good as he gave it a moment later by a big mean fella named Black Michael. He's not a black. He's an intimidating criminal sort, so he just needed a spooky nickname. But uh-oh, because the captain pulls out his pistola and takes aim. But respectable Greystoke won't have any of that nonsense on his watch and pushes the gun off its target, causing the captain to shoot Black Michael in the leg instead of the heart. He scolds the captain as the crew drags off their wounded members to heal below deck after thanking their savior. They become isolated on the ship, unable to trust crew and captain. But they still eat lunch in his quarters when he isn't there. 2 days after the incident, they come across a Royal Naval vessel, and John and his wife hop on board and safely ride the rest of the way to the African continent, laughing with friends about how super lame that other crew was. Just kidding. John decides not even to ask the naval ship if they'll take him, because they might call him a little baby and laugh him off their boat. He's an officer in the army after all, and should be able to handle a couple of bad boys. Spoiler alert, that lack of confidence is gonna cost him, and he has no idea just how much. As the ship passes, he realizes he totally should have asked to board for Alice's protection, but if he wasn't going to ask the Royal Army to take him on board, he definitely isn't going to ask the captain to go back so he can get a second chance. Later that day, the older crew member that the captain attacked approaches John and Alice on the deck and warns them that there's totally going to be a mutiny that results in murder soon. They discuss whether or not to tell the captain. John argues that they shouldn't because the men might kill them if they do. Alice argues that it's his duty to tell the captain because of his position, and she doesn't think those bullies on board will actually kill somebody because she's a sweet, naive girl who had a real privileged upbringing. Eventually, they decide that the captain and his men might have a chance of defeating the mutineers if they're warned ahead of time and go tattle on them bad old bullies. But that doesn't go well because the captain doesn't believe that his super loyal crew would ever mutiny. He calls them liars and gives them the boot. But before leaving, John gives the captain a taste of his own medicine and says, "Captain Billings, if you will pardon my candor, I might remark that you are something of an ass." Hoping that no one heard them, they hurry to their cabin to get John's guns for potential protection. But their bad luck kicks in again and find that the place has been ransacked and the guns are missing. While they debate reporting the stolen weapons to the super agreeable captain, they notice a note being slipped under the door. John tries to open the door and reveal the identity of the male ninja, but Alice convinces him not to. The note tells them not to tattle on the crew for stealing the guns and says that if they stay out of the way, they won't be harmed. They follow directions, and the next morning, as John goes up for breakfast, the goon squad takes over the ship, killing most of the crew. He casually watches the bloody ballet, smoking his pipe, but then remembers Alice is a thing and goes to find her. But she was right there the whole time and is super spooked. But they don't have much time to deal with feelings and such because one of the big bad bloodlusters rushes right for them. But it's fine, because Black Michael pops his gourd with a bullet. He warns the crew not to harm those goody-goody Greystokes, or else. Unfortunately, the crew doesn't appreciate Black Michael's decision, and with the pressure on high, he decides to drop the couple off at the next clear spot on the coast. John and Alice plead, argue, and try to make a deal with Black Michael, but he rejects all their attempts. On the bright side, he gives them his totally trustworthy word that he'll definitely tell the army that he left them on the coast somewhere, so they'll be sure to be found at some point. For some reason, this doesn't do much to put them at ease, but Black Michael leaves them plenty of food, supplies, and guns, even taking them back from the thieves that stole them for the mutiny, so the Greystokes can be safe and cozy on their mandatory vacation. As a bonus, he even made sure that their lonely location has a source of fresh water. Man, for a criminal, he's super nice. The couple watches the boat sail away and Alice gets emotional because it turns out they've got a baby on the way. John tells her to keep her chin up and get busy so they don't go cuckoo bananas, and she wishes she could have a man's sensibilities instead of being a slave to her emotions. But there's nothing she can do about that on the count of her being a lady. Ah, John, I wish that I might be a man with a man's philosophy, but I am but a woman, seeing with my heart rather than my head, and all I can see is too horrible, too unthinkable to put into words. I will do my best to be a brave primeval woman, a fit mate for the primeval man. Which, if you could have guessed, is another common thing in this book that's a sign of its times. John sets to work building them an elevated shelter with an old sail and some nearby trees, but not before pulling out the guns and ammo to make sure they can pop any predators. They barely sleep that night, haunted by the sounds of the jungle. Alice could swear she saw a strange man on a hilltop in the distance, backlit by the moon. But John assures her that it was probably just a shadow cast by the moonlight and comforts her. A panther prowls beneath their canvas nest, and exhaustion forces them into a fitful sleep throughout the night. And that was the first section of the series. I know, it was desperately lacking in both Tarzan and Apes, but I can promise you both in the next video. So until next time, thanks for watching!